Welcome, bitches. This is the With Love Nick podcast. There is nothing off limits here. Oh, get on your power panties. Shit, I always say that. How are we always aligned? You did not. Of course you did. Of fucking course you did. Success happens on the other side of conventional thinking. I say this all the time because when I was conventionally thinking, it left me burnt out and drunk. Welcome to this week's episode of the With Love Nick podcast. Welcome to this week's episode of With Love Nick. I'm your host, Nick BG. Today I have Indiavine with me, and I literally already have the chills. India is an unconventional business and life mentor, which is really on point because unconventional is my middle name. I'm like, oh, she uses my middle name. Awesome. So I would love for you to introduce yourself in your voice and chat a little bit about the human side of India, and then we're going to dive into some juicy business shit.
I love this. Well, hello, I'm India. And I think the human side of India is the very human side is Mama Bear of 3. And I say unconventional because you just said, unconventional is your middle name. My life is about as unconventional as it gets. Like high school dropout, pregnant at 17, baby by 18, 3 babies by the age of 24. All
Wow.
in very unconventional ways. I didn't even have the idea of being a mum, and all of a sudden I had 3 little babies and I say that and people are like, oh, like how did that happen? But it was like you couldn't even make it up in how crazy it was. Like, I'm not going to go into the details, but let's just say there was no stopping this happening. The universe was like, no, you're gonna have 3 babies and you're gonna have them young. And it made sense later down the track into why that happened. But that was kind of my, I guess, opening into this whole world of literally letting go and going like, okay, life, what have you got for me? And this is very much in hindsight. It wasn't like,
Yeah.
I knew what I did now. I look back and I'm like, oh, I've been on this journey longer than I knew I was on this journey. But by the time I was 24, I had 3 little babies. And also throughout that time, I had what someone would call, I guess, like the spiritual awakening, right? That the awakening of like, oh, life doesn't have to be an absolute shit show. You actually have like resources, you have this whole different paradigm, this different dimension to you. And I had that experience for myself. And it was like the day that I had this awakening, it was the craziest experience because it was like I was awakening to a different world, a different paradigm of life, this different knowing that life is not as it seems. It's you get the hand you're dealt, but then some people get the opportunity to become the dealer.
Ooh.
And it was like this opportunity. I was like, oh, I'm the dealer. And then it was this further not opportunity, but this understanding. It was like in this moment, I knew that this was bigger than me. It was not like, oh, now you understand this for yourself. It was like, no, you're going to understand this. You're going to understand this very quickly. It's not a learning, it's a remembering. And it was like, in this moment, it was the strangest thing. It was almost like I downloaded every book that you could possibly read in personal development or spirituality, manifestation. It was like I knew them all. I remembered them all, but I didn't read it. It was like when I was reading this stuff or listening, I'm like, I already know this, but I didn't know this a month ago. I didn't know this a year ago. And so it was this knowingness of like, you came here to do something with this stuff. It wasn't just a for me thing. It was like you're going to do something with all of this. So pay attention, because your life is no longer your life. Your life is now becomes the storyline. Your life now becomes the evidence. Your life now becomes this pathway for others. And so it was this human moment where it was everything previously was almost irrelevant to waking up to this moment and going, oh, no, everything that I decided about the human that I was no longer relevant, because I woke up to this understanding that, of course, I didn't know what I was going to do in this lifetime. Of course, I didn't understand any of this because I couldn't until that moment. And after that, it was like, there was no stopping me. It was just, I'm going to do everything that I can with this understanding that I came here to create something with my life in this new paradigm of understanding this whole different world. But it was going to be so much more than that. It was like, I'm doing this, and it becomes my life's work, but it also becomes my life's work in the way that it is the storyline for others to expand from. And I think that's what's led me literally to here and to everything.
Wow. Do you see why I got chills? Do you see why I had chills? I was like, I knew we were going to have this kind of conversation. And I'm thinking to myself as you're speaking, and I'm like, wow, like 6 months ago, I would not have been able to hold the capacity for this kind of conversation. A lot of my listeners know that I got sober in September of 2022. And since I have been really learning how I operate as a human being and learning what I'm here to do, it's like so many things are starting to unravel in the way that they make sense, right? And so it's like that also includes conversations that I am now ready to have. And when you were speaking on, the universe was like, no, you're going to have 3 kids, and it didn't make sense, and now it all makes sense. And now I actually have these types of conversations. It's like, okay, the beginning of my life, my adult life, was so unconventional. I've been married 3 times. I have 4 kids by 3 different dads, right? And it's like, why? Like, why would this happen, right? And now I understand that I had to go through the destruction and the addiction to chaos and all of this stuff to be the leader that I am today. And I wouldn't have survived that without the strength that came from leaving toxic relationships and having my kids. And so I was just having this conversation with my husband the other day, and he goes, could you even imagine where we'd be right now with no kids? We'd be like flying to another country, you know? And I was like, I'd probably be dead. Like, I literally just looked him dead in the face and I said, I would probably be dead if I did not have my kids. And it's like, as these things are happening to us, and we're spiraling kind of, because it's like, okay, but why does this keep happening to us? And then one day we just kind of fall into the like, no, I'm no longer going to be a victim to my circumstances. I'm no longer, like you said, I'm no longer going to be dealt the cards. I'm going to become the dealer. And then once we make that decision, it's like everything that happened to us made sense. Everything that led us to that point, we would not have been able to even comprehend putting one foot in front of the other without those experiences. So when you were saying that, I was like literally flashing back. I'm like, yep, this is why this happened. This is why this happened. And I was also speaking to another leader in the industry on my podcast a couple weeks ago about learning about my human design. And as I was learning about my human design, every time she would give me new information about how I operate, I was like, that's why I did that shit. That's why I did that shit. Right. And it's like, when we no longer fear what we might step into that doesn't make sense yet, it's like it just becomes a whole new realm of possibilities. So when you were saying that and you said, I'm no longer going to be dealt the cards, I'm going to become the dealer, I was just like, oh my God, that's me. Like, like that is it. And it's like, so many people don't get that opportunity to feel that way and really connect with themselves that way. So that was just like, wow, I resonated with that so much. And it really is like, I would love to dive into a little bit of the unconventionality of what led India from that point into the work that you do now in your business. Like, what did the transition look like when you were really getting to know yourself, understanding that this is why you have stepped into this arena? And how do you feel like that's reflected on who you are as a business owner now and how you serve other people?
My mind is just like exploding with so many avenues I could take this because it's the unconventional part, right? And there's something about a particular woman in this world, in this field, that it's almost like you just know that you were planted here for a reason. And this, what becomes difficult in my shoes sometimes is trying to convey this understanding of like, your life isn't even your life. Because once you step into the realm of feminine leadership and understand the responsibility in that this cannot be a world of information. It has to be a world of wisdom, right? I always say that if you operate in this industry for information, you operate at 5% of your capacity because you're only speaking to the conscious mind. Whereas if you operate from wisdom, lived experience, embodiment of like anything that I tell you, it's because I have lived this every single day, even in the most uncomfortable of initiations, every single day when no one's watching. It's like how deep I will take my own work is to some people probably quite extreme, quite frightening, which is, there's all sorts of stories in that. But I say, like, once you come into this space, your life is no longer your life, because you are the living, breathing embodiment. You are someone else's wisdom. You are someone else's evidence. We've all had those experiences where you get into someone's world and you actually don't even know what's happening, but something's becoming alive in you. And that's that wisdom paradigm. And I think when you ask me like what's led me to here now, I started with that because I didn't get into this industry to get into this industry. I didn't even know what a coach was. I didn't know that having 100K a month was a thing. I was like, do you know what I mean? Like that language. Yeah. And I was like, what are you talking about? You know? But I found myself in here. And I think that's a really important element that I want to kind of highlight, because I think there's something in that if you find yourself in here, you've got to look at the synchronicity in that, and you've got to stop asking how, and you've got to start asking why, and not even asking why, but just living and breathing what I'm about to say, which is, for me, when I started activating this stuff within myself, there was such an aliveness that came online within me that it was like, it almost felt just ridiculous to keep it to myself. Like do you know what I mean? It was just like, how can I know what I know and live what I live and experience my own transformation the way that I have, and not let that be someone else's experience, not give that to someone. And that's been me from day one. It's been pure, like, how can I not share this? Like I say that frequency is passion, but it's more than that. It's just like, it actually would be uncomfortable in my own system to not share this. And knowing that, it's like, okay, my life is so much bigger than myself. It is so much bigger than myself. And there's so much surrender in that, right? That's helped me through so many difficult experiences throughout this period. But my life is so much bigger than myself. And I remember when I was like awakening, I was like, this is back in, it must have been around 2018-ish, 2017, 2018. And all that was happening back then that I knew was podcasts. And I was like, cool, like that's what people do. They create a podcast. And so I didn't know what I was doing. I remember I got onto YouTube, and I think I found like Tim Ferriss's YouTube guy who did the tutorials of like how to set up a YouTube. And I just okay,
that's so like OG stuff.
I was like, you do this and you create an intro and you put it in GarageBand. And it was like, I had no idea what I was doing. Back then we lived in a 2-bedroom house, 3 kids in 1 bedroom, tiny little space. I had like a newborn baby. It was pure chaos. None of it made sense as to why I was doing it. but it was like, I have to do this for myself. Like, I have to do this for myself because it just doesn't make sense for me not to. The energy was so alive in me that I'm like, I have to follow this nudge. I have to follow this inspiration. And so I created this podcast, and I had no idea what I didn't create the podcast to then have a program to that. Do you know what I mean? It was just like, all I know right now, all I know is I'm creating a podcast. 85 solo episodes later, 85 solo episodes every single week, just showing up to this thing because it was just pure desire, pure passion, pure expression of self, and knowing there was a code that I knew even in that moment. And I figured it out because I would record and I'd be like, I don't even know what I just said, but I trusted in the aliveness and the potency of what came through. And so I put it out there. And then, you know, your mind comes online and goes like, should I be more structured in what I do? Should I actually have a plan? Should I actually be knowing what I'm doing? And then the influx of people from who knows where are all of a sudden in my inbox being like, I just don't think you understand like what this podcast did to me. You know, what's like, this is just, you have no idea how much this is landing. And so I just trusted in that. I just trusted in, okay, I don't need to work this out with my mind, because it seems that every time I do that, I just come further away from myself. And it's a big code in so many things, but I just trusted this aliveness, this passion within myself. And it was very much like whatever moved in me to create the podcast was then like, okay, start sharing on Instagram, start actually creating something with this. No idea what I was doing. And it was like, honestly, I remember back then it was, I think the whole boss babe paradigm was a really big thing. So I was like, okay, like this is quotes. We're just creating like all of this.
Hashtag boss babe.
Totally. And I loved it. And it was incredible. And then that was that evolution. And then the next thing I would see people like create programs. And so I was like, I can do that. I can create a program. And I remember I think I took like 9 months creating this one program, which was so funny. And it was, I think I wrote like an entire book because I didn't understand. Really, it was like all written out, and I didn't understand this concept of programs. I only saw like tiny people on the internet. And so I was just like, yes, this is what you do. And Inspired Nudge, I ended up in a mastermind. No idea what a mastermind was back then, like literally no idea. I didn't even think it was called that. And I ended up in this, group mentorship experience, again, from following an Inspired Nudge. And she said to me, hey, you can do programs where you literally just create a Zoom link and a sales page, and you just meet people on the Zoom link each week. And that becomes like, oh, okay.
Oh, it gets to be this easy.
I just created this over 9 months, but okay, let's do it that way again. And it was such that it was like literally the most inspired, aligned moment of like the universe was like, oh my God, this woman is taking 9 months to create a program. We need her in this, like we need to get her expanded by someone, put her in that mastermind, let her mind expand. And all of a sudden I had this new program, and I think it was like my first ever launch, and it had like 35 signups because I had this podcast and people were just waiting for the next thing. And then it was that next moment of, well, I created one program. Why don't I create another opportunity for people to come in after that? And that's kind of how my business was formed. It wasn't planned. It wasn't, how do I do this? It wasn't, I want this, I want that. It wasn't anything. It was this identity and this knowingness of, I came here to do this work in the world, and understanding that when you are that person, the resources that you need to do that come with the dream. Like it was this knowingness of, I know I'm here to do this. I know I'm here to do this work. And so in that understanding, I also somewhere along the lines understood that the resources that I needed to have in order to do that, whether that was, you know, someone else leading me, whether that was financially, whatever it was, I just understood at the core of me that whatever is needed in order for me to do this work will always be there. And whether that's in inspiration, whether that's in the form of another person, whether that's in the form of literally finances to support my life as I'm doing this work, and understanding this just blew everything out of the water for me, because I started to see in my own world, people would lead themselves like that. It wasn't this thing of like, how do I do this? And how do I do that? It wasn't methodical. It was energetic. It was a frequency where they followed this thing within themselves. And it was almost like this co-creation was happening. And that's how I've kind of gotten to where I am. Like, I think about my experience, and people, you know, say to me all sorts of things of like, how did you get to where you are? And the difficult thing for me sometimes is
I wish I could
know that question. I wish I could
Yeah.
answer that question, but I can't. And it's been so funny, because the more I've tried to answer that question, or the more I've tried to fit the box of someone that could answer that question, so much so that I could give it to someone else, the further I've gotten away from myself. And it's been such a beautiful initiation to be able to understand that I'm not going to be the mentor for people that, you know, need it done that way. And that's perfect. It's not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but that's why I call myself this unconventional mentor in ways, because everything I've done has not been something that I've been able to make sense to someone else. And I started attracting women that were the same. And I started attracting women that would go from, you know, zero to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in a year. And it would be the same energy. we'd never even have a conversation around what are you doing, what to do, how to do it. It was just these conversations of like, we'd have all of this expansive conversations around what's happening in their lives, and dive deeper into the empowerment of who they are and all of these different things. And they'd report back and be like, hey, by the way, we're celebrating this. Hey, by the way, we're celebrating that. And those same women, I started to see something within them of like, when the discomfort got there of not being able to hold that unconventional element of like, hey, I don't know how I'm doing this. And that's really uncomfortable, because other people want to know what I'm up to, and other people want to know what's going on, and other people don't like that. They don't like the ease of that, right? They don't like the lack of understanding in that. And so they get either the fear of projection or the actual projection, not be able to hold it. So they'd go and try and make more sense of it, and they'd slow themselves down, and they'd lose themselves in the process. And then there'd be the homecoming, where they'd have to come home to themselves and go, okay, so I just went a detour off my own path, went down this path to make it all make more sense, only to come back to the path where I actually have to just be okay with the fact that this probably is never going to make sense. This is never going to be something that can just be right into the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 step. And, you know, when we go down that path, it's difficult, because you're going to attract the person that doesn't want to be the living, breathing embodiment of the wisdom, of the leadership, of like showing up to their deepest callings and not making it make sense to someone else, not trying to fit it in the box, not trying to fit it in the system, not trying to fit it into labeling it all. So it's like, hey, what do you do? And it's comfortable for me to tell you, right? Or it fits in with anything else that would make this thing more conventional or more comfortable to someone else. And it'd be just this back and forth. And I'd experience it even with myself of like, oh, yep, okay, I went down that path because it's so incredibly uncomfortable to own the vulnerability in a woman's true power, which is they have the ability to do this. And I always come back to that quote that Marianne Williamson says when she's quoting, you know, A Course in Miracles, which she says, you know, our greatest power, our greatest fear is not our darkness, it's our light, you know, because who are we to be all that we really are? And you know, she continuously says like, the greatest fear of a human is actually to own all of who they are. And that's a lot of the experience of these women. It's like the ownership in who they are, because they didn't attach anything to it, right? They just went off. They just followed the thing. They followed the passion. They didn't know what they were doing. They were just doing it. And then there was that moment where it's like the pullback, right? Of like, hold on a minute. I can't be all of this. I can't do all of that. I can't. And this is all so subliminal and subconscious. And as I recognized this more and more, and even recognized it within myself, of where I would even try and make my world, my business, make more sense to someone else. It was just this real moment of like, for as long as you do that, you're going to keep going on the left path, only to be brought back to this path that, yeah, there may not be anyone in front of you. There may not be a path to follow, because you are the path, right?
Yeah.
But it's just this experience, and I just witness it in so many women. And then I just had this moment for myself of going, yeah, okay, this is never going to make sense to me or anyone else. And the more I try to make it make sense, the more I slow myself down. And it's a very long-winded answer to how I got here, but it sums up the the experience of looking around my life and going, I don't know, but here we are.
Well, here's the thing is like, I resonated with all of that. I was almost like, just gonna start moving my lips along with yours. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. But I really feel, and I wanted to ask you this question because that's the exact answer that I wanted to hear. It was almost like, I think I need a little bit of permission because this is the way that I feel. No, I'm just kidding. But for real, it's like we witness a lot of the leaders in the industry who do make this, it's like the entirety of what they are supposed to do on this earth, right? And a lot of them cannot answer that question conventionally. And that also makes it really hard for us to like articulate our message sometimes, because everything is so like strategy based and in our marketing and all of that stuff. And it's like, well, how all of these people are niching and like finding their ideal client and finding who exactly they want to talk to. But like, how do I talk to something that doesn't even make sense to me? And so that takes a lot of practice. And that has taken me a very long time to be able to really hunker down on my message. I hate that word hunger, but I can't think of anything else right now. Really hone in on my messaging when it comes to, well, how did I get here? I don't fucking know. I fell into this industry. I didn't all of a sudden one day want to make a bunch of money being a coach. Like you said, when I started my business, I had my head down so hard that I didn't even know the coaching industry was a thing. I thought that I was coming up with this like awesome shit that like nobody's ever talked about before. And it was like, social media, when I started my business 14 years ago, it was like, didn't have the influence that it has now. So I'm over here like, oh my gosh, this is like so innovative. Nobody else is doing this, right? And then I get on social media and I was like, well, this is a humbling moment. You know what I mean? Like here, and then Nick enters the world of coaching, and then it's like, it starts to take more influence and it starts to, um, kind of put you more and more into this box. And while I was building my business into multiple six figures, it was during the hustle era. It was during the boss babe era. It was during the like, you can do this with 15 minutes in a phone, except for I'm working 14 hours a day. I'm just not going to tell you that because that's not what sells. You know what I mean? And it's like all of that stuff. And then somebody asks you that question. Once you start getting into the deeper sense of self, which reflects in your business, and then you start succeeding and people are genuinely attracted to you, it's like magnetism and it's not like the marketing part of it. And then those questions of like, how did you get here? They start to dissipate. And it's like the why and the who and the deeper meaning of like, okay, who is behind this? I want to pick your brain apart. I don't want the framework. I don't want the shit you've written down. I don't want, it's like the strategy. There are millions of strategies that work out there, but the strategies that work for us, we have to trial and error. We can have a guideline, we can have a baseline, but it's like no framework is going to work for the same person. So that has to be up to the person. But when it comes to that self-exploration piece of it that you talked so in depth about, that was like the entirety of why I wanted you to come on the podcast, was it's like that cannot be explained. That is, and that also comes with misunderstanding because people do fear what they don't understand. And so to the conventional mind, it's like, you make how much money doing what? And you like, doesn't that scare the shit out of you? It's like, no, like when you were talking earlier, all of the things that I now know about myself, I had within me the entire time that I didn't know that I had those resources available to myself. I wasn't I wasn't consciously using them. I was subconsciously using them, or I wouldn't have made it to where I am today. I wouldn't have gotten through the dark, or, it wouldn't have came to me one day like, this is your purpose, right? That was all inside of me the entire time. But like, I don't fucking know how to explain that to someone. I can't be like, well, I sat down on my couch and I started writing, and then all of a sudden I had this equation. It's like, it doesn't work that way. And so when you can't answer that question, people are like, oh, I don't want to hire you. You don't have the answers for me. And I'm like, no, but I can help you find the answers within yourself, right? It's like, I am not available for the woman trying to get something from me. I'm available for the woman who wants to get something from herself. And that's where people like you and I, because we do live unconventionally every single day. I mean, even the shit that we talk about and like the mastermind that we're in, it's like off our rockers, like insanity, right? But people fear that. And so naturally, sometimes I'm not going to speak for you, but in my space, it's like, okay, but I want to be able to bring my messaging to the point where people can comprehend because I want them to hire me, right? So then we can talk about the more in deep stuff, but then it's like I lose myself when I get there. So I kind of have to like really check in with myself daily to make sure that I don't go there because the influence of the industry can be that strong. And I do feel like the unconventionality of what we bring to the table is very rare in our industry. And I really don't think that people can wrap their head around how hard that can be for us sometimes. It's like in a world of Stanleys, we're the Yetis, you know what I mean? And it's like sometimes it's hard to be like, okay, how can then I relate, or how can
Mm.
people relate to me when I can't even comprehend the magic that I bring to the table? And so that was just so interesting and beautifully articulated when you talked about all of that. And it really, like, a lot of my listeners are going to feel so much permission and validation in that. And I really do feel like that's why we attract the people that we attract, because it's almost like that permission to come forward and be like, be fucking weird, be insane, be unhinged, be unconventional. It's okay. And like with that, I want to talk about just a little bit about what deconditioning means to you, because we are all conditioned from a very young age to do this, this, and this. There's a step, there's a step, there's a step. Go to school, get a diploma, get a job, get married, have babies, get the house, do all of the things. So when we're doing things without a step by step, like you said, somebody might not always be in front. Like, what does deconditioning mean to you? And if you had to tell somebody, like my listeners, how they could at least get to a point to open their minds a little bit, to put one foot in front of the other in terms of that, like how would you voice that to them?
Oh, so much. Like, there's so much I want to say. I think the biggest thing is, and this is going to loop back, but it's going to kind of hit on a couple of points there, is like, when I understood that a lot of this industry speaks to people's minds, right? That's the paradigm we came into. Speak to the mind. I remember when I first came into this industry and I was learning business, like I thought that I was going to learn business outside of myself. Let's put it that way. Right? That's what we do. I don't know how to do this. I'm going to learn this from outside of myself.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think back in hindsight, and none of that was coming from an inspired place, like a place of like, oh, I can't wait to do this. It was like, I think I have to do this, right?
Yes,
Hear the
right,
hear
right.
the hear the have to, right? That's the conditioning straight away. And what do we hear? Oh, well, you need this and you need that, you need this. Again, fear paradigm, fear frequency, need, have to, should, all fear. And so I'd hear the pain points, right? You have to touch on people's pain points. You have to have a sales page that's so long that it would literally make someone's finger hurt to scroll to the bottom so they can finally get to the bottom and press. I mean, like, That's what we're hearing all the time. And it wasn't until I understood that stuff's great, but it's speaking to people's minds. And so for the people that want to create this from the mind, because they are afraid of the power element, they are afraid of the wisdom element, they are afraid of being all in, right? They are afraid of being the vulnerable ones. That's like, again, I say vulnerability and I link that to someone's true power, right? I think one of the most important things we can actually do is literally own our power, own our ease, own the part of us that goes, hey, I kind of feel like I don't need to do any of those things, but like someone saying that I need to do them, so I guess I better do them. That's the conditioned response, right? That person's an authority, that person's ahead, like I've got to go do those things, because kind of like, and I say owning the power, owning, like going into the vulnerable element of that is the part of you that goes, I already know what to do. I already know how to do all of this, but it's not following that, and it's not following this system, and it's not following that person's way of doing that thing. So who am I? Who am I to say that I get to have success without doing the thing that I've been told that I need to do to create success? That is conditioning at large, right? You have to, you should, this is what you have to do in order to get this, in order to get the love and belonging that you're looking for. This is the system that we are essentially grown up through and into. And what's really interesting for me, and when I have contemplated this a lot, I thought about it and I went, okay, so for me, my first 16 years of life at school were extremely miserable. Were extremely miserable because I never found my place in a school setting. I hated being there. I hated forcing myself to go to this thing every day that I didn't want to be at and I didn't like being at, until I got to the point where me and my parents had the conversation. They said, hey, let's just call it a day. Let's just call it a day. You're not gonna get anything from this. I know that. But it was never like, hey, you're a failure, you're a dud, let's just cut our losses. It was almost this subliminal knowingness that you're not going to awaken, you're not going to find your rhythm through this system.
Yeah. Wow.
You're not going to find your rhythm through the system. And I think back to the people that I have around me. Like I've grown up with creativity and entrepreneurship all around me. I think about my dad. He's built his entire life through artistry. He's an artist, he's a creative, and he went to art school to get the certificate, right? I remember asking him, like, why did you go to art school? He's like, oh, I kind of just did it because I thought I needed a certificate to call myself an artist. He was there for a month and he left. And he left because he knew, one, the longer I stay here, the further away from myself I get.
Oof.
The further away from myself I get. Two, he also knew that his artistry couldn't be like his creative gifts could not be taught, because it's a co-creation, it's a connection with his creative side. And three, it's like that Einstein quote, if you judge a fish's ability to climb a tree, you're gonna say it's unintelligent. It's like, if you decide how good an artist is based off of how they're being told to create, you're probably going to say they're not that great. But if you actually just let them go, let them create, let them trust themselves, and let them be in this like life force energy coming through them, if you let them do that and you give them, you say, hey, you're a great artist, you're amazing at what you do, you believe in them, watch it how that person flourishes, right? Whereas you put them into art school, they're going to probably, he still says, if I was there longer than I was, I probably never would have continued on. But it was his knowingness, his intuition to pull himself out of that place. And I think of me when I dropped out of school and I went into, I had no idea what I was going to do, but I went into just like helping my dad out with his business. And I didn't know how to do any of it, yet I was doing all of it because there was no, you need to do this, you need to do that. It was like, hey, what do you want to bring? What do you want to bring to this? What do you want to contribute to the creative element of this business? Or what do you think we should do? And it was this opportunity to feel that feeling of someone believes in me, someone actually thinks I'm a valuable human being, which is what I needed to awaken, right? I needed to awaken to this idea that if you judge me on who I am when I'm at school, you'll think I'm an absolute nobody, talentless, I'm not going anywhere. You take me out of that system, you believe in me, you believe in my value, you bring me into this world of like, let's just play around with what you inherently have. And all of a sudden I'm a designer out of nowhere. All of a sudden I'm designing homewares. All of a sudden I'm creating art, yet I couldn't do any of it at school. And so as I've contemplated the experiences and the synchronicities that I've had more and more, I think even about my fiance, like he was a high school dropout as well. If you judged him on who he was when he was at school, you would have said, you're not going anywhere. You're not going to be able to do this. He got out of that and has built an incredible business for himself, which he knew how to do like that. No one told him how to do it. It was him following what he knew to do. It was him following, like, I can do this. I know how to do this. I want to do this. And the rest was a learning as he was going. It was like launch the plane and figure out how to fly it on the way down. Like, it was an experience. And I started thinking about this more and more and more. And I was like, wow, isn't it interesting how much we slow ourselves down when we go into this space of, if it isn't working, doing it like this, then I guess I'm not meant to do this work. I'm not meant to be talented. I'm not meant to be gifted. And I think about my experience, dropping out of school, and in my experience with businesses, every time I've tried to box it in, I've tried to do the conditioned thing of, well, this makes sense in my mind, because if this person's saying X equals Y equals Z, then it makes sense in my mind, right? Never have I had success trying to do that. I've lost myself, become miserable, become burnt out, become a shell of myself. And it was this funny knowing that, like, when I go into this place of, this is really vulnerable, but I don't need to do it that way. And I know that. And I know that if I'm actually operating from the deepest place of alignment within myself, and so much so that I'm in love with what I'm creating, because I think the thing is with business is so many people come into this space from a deep sense of passion, a deep sense of inspiration, a deep sense of desire. And that's the product, right? That's the product of the business. But then the growing of the business, all of a sudden, all of the product of the business, the frequency of that gets lost because they lose themselves to the growing of the business. And for me, I had to relate the product of the business and the frequency and the integrity of that couldn't be diminished by the growing of the business. And so as I kind of came into that more and more and more, I'm like, it is completely out of alignment and out of integrity for me not to follow the deconditioned path of, like, this can't be coming from anything else other than pure truth within myself. Pure, this actually expands me. This actually inspires me. And it was just this relinquishing of control of not just trying to make it make sense, but a means to an end. I had to relinquish the control of the means to an end of, I'm doing this to get this result, so I look valuable to here. Because for as long as I did that, the energetics was so incredibly off, which is such a big conversation that should be having an industry of, like, we need to look at where there's a means to an end, because as you do that, you come out of this paradigm, which is like the wisdom, the embodiment that this business is bigger than myself. This is stories that I'm telling. This isn't information that I'm giving someone that hits their 5%. This is something that when people come into my world, I don't focus so much on my world making sense, because I know that people coming into my world is an experience, right? When they come into this space, and you would relate to this, the clients that are meant to be there, they've come in from the most aligned place. They've come in from a place, not from their mind of like, well, I think this is going to get me this, and it's a means to an end, but actually, I know when I enter into this space, I experience more of myself. As I experience more of myself, something comes alive in me, and it's going to be that same frequency of, it doesn't make sense, but I know what to do. It doesn't make sense, but I know how to move. And as I got more comfortable with the understanding of, okay, when I box myself in, when I go back to let's say the trauma response of the conditioning of the high school and the system and all the different things, that's the trauma response of me wanting to belong, me wanting to fit in, me wanting, you know, to be accepted. So the biggest human thing is like tribal
Yeah. Fear
brain.
of rejection.
Totally. Like
Yeah.
we still operate like that, even though we're not in tribe. So we're gonna have that element. But when you can be brave enough, when you can be courageous enough, when you can be vulnerable enough, which isn't a word that's held in this conversation a lot, but it is a vulnerable way of being when you go, oof, I'm actually just gonna trust myself. I'm
Oh
just
my
gonna trust
gosh.
my alignment. Like that's one of the most vulnerable things you can do. And we also get to have the conversation where we get to have our expanders and we get to have our permission slips. And I know a big role for me is to be all of myself and to let that be enough, because I know when I am all of myself, fully expressed in myself, I become the expander for someone else. And it's so easy to say that we want to be the expander, but like the expander is someone who doesn't try and manipulate themselves into being someone else. Like there's a very vulnerable element in becoming the expander for someone else, which is the frequency and the energetics of being an expander is someone looking at you and going, wow, you did that. That means I can do that too.
Wow.
And that's our role. That's our
Wow.
role as a leader in this industry. It's not to tell
Like what
people
a
what.
privilege to have that role too. I literally just like bask in that in gratitude. And I was talking to my mentor about this the other day, and it was like I was just bawling my eyes out and just talking about like how grateful I was to be able to feel so fucking good about what is going on in my business that has nothing to do with money. It's like to be at that point when for 13 years it was just hustle and money and sales and marketing and all of this stuff. And it's like when I got sober, and actually when you were speaking, it was like I had this just visual. I'm an ADHD generator, and so I visualize a lot when people are speaking. I respond to that with visuals. And when you're speaking on all of this, I'm imagining myself like in this tunnel, and outside of the tunnel is just this bright light. And it's like I release the hand of another form of myself that is no longer the 3D, and I turn around and look at the girl in the tunnel, and I'm just like go, it's okay, right? Like just giving ourselves that permission to go into the unknown, because we have that knowing. Like it goes back to what you were saying at the beginning. It's like, oh, I don't fucking know where I'm going, but I know it's for a purpose. Like when you feel that so deeply and you resist that, it's like, I feel like if I did that at this point, I would like physically vomit because I'm like, I can't, like, I don't operate that way anymore. And so everything that you just said was like, I resonate with it so much. And it's like, what a privilege to be able to like shed that kind of light on other women, where it truly is just changes the trajectory of their future. Like it's like from that day where they have that, wow, I can do this too. It's like nothing will ever be the same for them again, right? It's like when I first learned about human design, I was like, what is this human design stuff that everybody's talking about, right? They're like manifester, Manny Gen, and I'm like, what is this? So I'm like 6 months into sobriety, I think. And I start digging into it a little bit deeper. And then in December of 2023, I just hired a mentor to literally go through the graph with me, figure out my lines, figure out my chakras, all of these things. And everything that she said, I was just like, wow. Talk about getting in touch with yourself. It was like I was having flashbacks to all these like big pivotal moments in my life. And I was like, that's why I'm doing that. That's why I did it that way. Like keep going now. And I literally wrote this post the day after I had that like self-recognition, um, about how all of these flaws, all of these things that people would say that I was impulsive and all of these things. Now I use those, right? When I feel impulsive, I'm like, whew, like there is no stopping me when I feel that. When I feel that like manic episode, it's like good
Go.
fucking riddance. We are going, and I'm about to make like a shitload of money, right? It's like it's so insane though. And so you talk about all of that, and you talk about one thing that stood out to me was your parents going, that's not for you. And it's like almost shifting into what like you and I do in this industry of really just handing the permission slip to somebody to say, hey, we're here to support you, and we're here to give you this space where you can be whoever the fuck you desire to be, because you know what? It's going to get insane. It's going to get unhinged. It's going to get crazy, and it's going to feel really uncomfy for a hot second. But then when you finally put both feet into that full power, it's like, their life will never be the same. And then every memory that they have, and I went through the same experience. It was like every memory that I had, or every time I went back and felt a little bit of guilt or shame, it was like I contradicted myself, and I was like, oh, I no longer feel that way. Oh, I no longer feel that. Oh, I know why I operated that way. And then I step into new levels of like leading myself and trusting myself. And now it's just to the point where it's like my sacral tells me to go and I fucking go, right? It's like, okay, it's like spinning to the point of almost an orgasm. That means we need to go like right now. So all of that was just so resonant. And I just can't, this is activating me, and I have to go to bed soon. So I'm like, I'm going to have a whole bunch of downloads, and I'm going to have to exhaust my energy on that. But yeah, I loved this conversation, and I feel like so many people, and especially, people who are going to be listening, this type of self-exploration is really hard for a lot of people. It's hard for them to comprehend. It's hard for them to open up enough to even like get a glimpse of what that could feel like. So it's like, when when do you feel like somebody is ready? Like, what would you say to someone if you were having a conversation with someone? How would you be able to tell if they were on the edge of being ready to like know that they can step into that, or know if they had to do a little bit more of that inner work? Because I feel like when people aren't ready and we like come at them with all this information, we're like, go do it. Like, if you feel it, go do it. And then they're like, this was fucking nuts. Like, how do you feel someone would know if they're ready to do that or even have this kind of conversation?
Yeah. What it comes down to for me is I don't think anyone's ever going to be ready.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is I can't tell someone to be deeper in their purpose. But what it comes down to for me is I look back at what I have, had to, the highs and the lows of this experience, because we're going to have them, right? We're going to have them. And I think about the really hard times and I think about the really low times. And the only thing that would get me through those moments was the context that this business is bigger than me.
Mm.
And what I'm doing is, it's like, for as long as I try and not do it, I'm just going to be brought back to it. And it's like, I often say you are the common denominator in your business. It's not what you do, it's who you are. And so in that, once you're ready to take on that, knowing that this isn't, and I call it trying frequency versus doing frequency. How I know when someone can step into this paradigm, which is, it's kind of like, if you want to put it into the energetics of things, it's kind of playing in the quantum field, right? Because it's nothing that makes sense. It's nothing that's predictable. It's pure possibility. It's pure potentiality, meaning it's like, I just know that I have a desire, and that desire has everything equipped within it that I need to actualize that and manifest that into a reality, including within my business. And so when it comes to being the common denominator, it's like, it's just a choice. But
I knew you were going to answer it like this. I knew it.
The frequency that I want to say, like when I tap into the idea of like, is someone ready or someone not, I can see it straight away. It's this thing that I call trying frequency versus doing frequency. I can have a 5-minute conversation with someone and know the trajectory they're on based off of if they're in trying frequency and doing frequency. Trying frequency is, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to see if I have what it takes. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to base what I'm going to do and how successful I'm going to be based off of what's happening right now in my business. I'm going to do this launch and I'm going to decide how successful I'm going to be. I'm going to try this and see if I can make it. If that's the frequency you're in, you're not ready yet. And that's not to say that you're not going to be successful. It's just needing to awaken to a higher paradigm than that, a higher frequency. The doing frequency, there is no such thing as this doesn't work. There is no such thing as money not supporting you. There is no such thing as blocks, right? It's like you're doing it. There is no, oh, can I do this? Oh, do I have a subconscious fear? We have all sorts of fears, but we move with them, right? Because it's like, I know that this is bigger than me. I know that I'm supported in doing this work. I know that everything in this universe has conspired with me up until now in my entirety of my life to get me to this point. That is a knowingness. That knowingness activates everything. So there's never a looking at what's happening in your world now to determine how successful things are going to be, because it's like, it's so irrelevant to the actual context of the life you're living, which is I'm creating something exceptional. And if you come in here just to if you can try and see if you can have a successful business, it will be very difficult for you because you will keep going on that left path. You'll keep getting distracted of like, oh, I don't think I have what it takes. I better go learn from this person, or I better go do this, I better go do that. And that's where the investments come from. And it's very stop start. Whereas if you have this doing frequency and you understand this activation principle, that it's like, okay, well, if I'm going to learn from someone, it's going to be to experience more of myself. It's going to be activating more of myself to come online. It's not that they have something that I don't have. It's just, I know when I'm with that person and I'm in that person's presence, I experience more of myself. More of me is activated, and I get to have that. I get to have that resource because I am divinely supported in me doing what I came here to do in this lifetime. I'm not trying to see if I can do it. I'm doing it no matter what. It's a complete devotion to being who you came here to be in this lifetime, and actually acting upon that and actually claiming that for yourself, which no one can give you, right? It's a decision, and it's a vulnerable decision, because once you make that decision, like I said, everything becomes synchronistic. And so if I'm going through something big in my life, I'm like, damn it. But I'm also like, okay, well, who are all the clients that are about to come into my world
Here
that
the
now
fuck we go.
need to go through this one first? It's like, here we go. And that's what it becomes. But it's like, you take that on board, but you also get to leave all of that questioning behind of like, who am I to do this? Do I get to have it? It's like, that shit doesn't exist when you just come into this space of like, hey, like, this is bigger than me. I don't have a choice. If I resist this, I live in suffering. Whereas if I just go deep into it, and for me, like, the more unconventional I've allowed it to be, the less resistance there is. But the more I've tried to fit it into, again, the paradigm that makes sense, the more resistance there is. That's not resistance from my ego not wanting to grow. That's resistance from my soul going, don't go down that pathway again. Like, don't get detoured once again. Like, when going down that, the resistance is like that soul resistance of like, hey, stop doing those things. Like, you just have to be okay with the fact that this business is bigger than you. So you don't get to manipulate the way that you're perceived from others. You don't get to manipulate, how others perceive you. It's like, this is bigger than you. You have everything it takes. Yeah, it's damn vulnerable to know that, like, there is so much ease in what you're going to do, but the ease is got that duality side of like, the difficult part in that is the emotional roller coaster, the vulnerability, they're going, oh, like, this is bigger than me. So if you need me to go through something, I'm going to have to go through it, which may be very, very hard, but that all contributes to the ease of this illogical, unconventional paradigms of businesses that we're creating.
I love all of that. And I actually asked you that question because I was like, I say all of this all the time. and I need my listeners to hear somebody else say the same exact thing. Was basically, I was like, okay, and then we're talking about we're constantly creating. So we're never in the same circumstance. So allowing yourself to detach from our current circumstance to be able to create and just keep creating. Like you said, it's bigger than us. It's not our current circumstance. Nothing is ever our current circumstance. Like from 2 seconds ago, I'm in a different circumstance, right? So it's like allowing ourselves to detach from that. I could literally talk to you forever about this. This is the longest episode I've done so far. And I'm like, we need to do like a part 2, a part 3, and a part 4 because 4 is my number. So, but
Yeah.
I loved this conversation. I loved everything about this conversation. I'm so lit up and I'm so activated. And I'm just like, I need to stay up for a couple more hours to like, I have so many downloads right now. But I just want to thank you for being here. And yeah, I'm not going to be able to go to bed now. My brain's like, okay, all right, nice massage. India just gave it this nice massage, and oh, just so many amazing things. My listeners are going to fucking die over this episode. So thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to put all of India's info in the description, how you can get a hold of her, how you can work with her, all of the things. Go follow her on Instagram, connect with her. She's absolutely incredible. Thank you for all who tuned in, all who are going to tune in, and all who are going to listen to this 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times. I will see you on the other side of the next episode. With love, Nick and India.